Stop by and see us. We're the newest dealer in the area.
Vitamin prices out of sight? Not at Super Value Nutrition. Our prices are tough to beat. Family owned and operated since 1977. Super Value Nutrition offers high quality, name brand supplements at everyday low prices. Our knowledgeable staff is on hand and eager to assist you. Make Super Value Nutrition your one-stop shop for vitamins, herbs, sports nutrition, health foods, and so much more. Remember, Super Value has super prices and a whole lot more.
Good evening. Welcome to Dateline Sarasota. I'm Kerry Kirshner. Tonight we want to do some reflection with somebody that really should need no introduction, but he's not a member of our community. He's crossed our paths many times, but he's got a wonderful and fascinating story, and something that I know you will be as fascinated to hear from as much as I'm looking forward to hearing Frank tell his story. Our guest today is Frank Johnson. Frank's the retired president of Jacksonville University, the California State University of Los Angeles, and the Southwest Florida College in Naples. He also headed two national foundations. One, interestingly enough, was the Arvida Foundation, which was the developer of, as many of you know, the Arthur Vining Davis Foundation, which was the developer of Longboat Key. But really what we're going to have Frank on to talk about tonight is a book that he wrote of his personal experience during the Second World War called One More Hill. And it's a fascinating book, and I invite you to not only join in as viewers, but if you have any questions of Frank, give us a call. Our number is 371-2522. Frank, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Frank, you know, as when I found out about you in your book, I guess what I found was most fascinating is that, especially as we grow older and you grow older, it's very rare that we have an opportunity to meet someone who not only experienced the Second World War, but fought in the campaigns of North Africa, Italy, and also landed on D-Day on Omaha Beach. And you know, that's a legacy and stories that have been lost to most Americans, I'm afraid, today.
Well, we're getting scarcer and scarcer.
Yeah, yeah.
Any survivors?
That's right, and so somehow you have kept your lucidity. And this book, by the way, was considered by Bantam Books to be one of the 50 best books written on the Second World War, and actually sold over 150,000 copies.
Yes, we were lucky, and none of my books since then have done anything like that.
well, let's just share, if you will, a little bit about your experience, because I think, you know, as we go into a place in a different type of warfare today, I think lost in that is what you know, the logistics, everything that happened. Is as I read the book, I was most fascinated in reflecting on really, despite the fact that this is, you know, that I can sit and talk with someone, you know, in today's world, nobody could probably appreciate the kind of hardship and in actual, the difference in the way the military was conducted, beginning with how you left the United States in an old banana boat.
Yeah. Well, we made it. Sometimes the waves looked like they were going to submerge us going over, let alone what happened later. But you touched on a very important point. I think the difference in this kind of war, what you're reading in that book is very ancient history. You know, we had front lines and we had amphibious landings and so on and so on. But this thing of caves and people hiding, and there's one similarity is the tendency to personalize these things. Adolf Hitler personalized our enemy, and we all hated him and demonized him and so on. Well, we've done the same with Osana, and that may be a mistake because we can't find him, and yet the substructure that he has created is where much of the evil lies. You have to do this. I think you have to personalize these things to get public momentum and support and so on. But now the danger possibly is that it will erode away because we can't find him, and that particular personality hasn't been brought to book. But I think you are really speaking more about the methods of warfare, possibly. And
well, not just the methods,
so
though,
different.
but also the mentality. Frank, describe to us what it was like at the time. You've just graduated from college. You're a young man. You went to Rutgers University. You know, you've gone through officers' candidate school to become a young officer. You get shipped out, and yet there was a mood here that I even drew from the book, that there was an actual lottery to find out who were the first ones to leave, and you really felt lucky that you were going to go. I mean, this was there was now what was the sentiment? I mean, as opposed to today, as you point out, you know, we had this evil man who destroyed a building, took all sorts of lives, but there seems to be a pervasive feeling throughout your whole book that there was a real mission on the part of the military and the people who fought in this war against a system that seems to be much more pervasive today, as you point out.
Yes, I think that there was a lot of it was youthful idealism, of course, and a lot of it was just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But there was a thrust here. They misused, as you noticed 3 months ago, the word crusade because it has certain implications in the Islamic community. But we took it as a crusade to knock off this man Adolf Hitler and all that he represented, even though we didn't understand much and we weren't in the echelons that were fully informed and so on. But I think it was a crusading spirit. A lot of it, I'm sure, had to do with boredom with college and work and so on, to get out and do something different and so on. And you always had a spirit of what will I say, indomitability. I'm going to get back. Now maybe the guy next to me will get killed and so on, not that you would wish that or anything, but there was an idea, I'm going to get through this thing. And then if you did get through it, and Joe on one side of you and Larry on the other side got killed, then you came back with awful guilt feelings. Why did I make it and they didn't? But you see, before you go into combat, you don't think of that. You say, I'm going to make this. And you write out wills and you send back your insurance allotments and so on as a matter of course, but you don't really think it's going to come about.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about, you know, and again, I think it's because we have been so far from combat and warfare. North Africa, in your description, certainly sounds a lot like what I perceive Afghanistan to be like. It certainly wasn't anything of a developed country. You talked about the mud and the filth and the just, you know, describe what that was like. I mean...
Well, it's all of what you say plus cold. You would think of Africa, you know, as a place of deserts and heat and so on. But this, of course, this was in the winter.
Right.
And it was very cold, and the primitive, the misery, the poverty. And then, of course, the fact coloring the early part of the campaign was the fact that we got shellacked. I mean, at Kasserine Gap, we simply were taken over, and one Major General Friedenthal was fired, or rather transferred out as a result of that failure. Maybe he was at fault, maybe he wasn't, but we just did not perform well as soldiers, that's all. And the Nazis, with their armor, their Mark IVs, their 88 millimeter guns, and the things that were always better than ours, we never matched them in certain things during the war. They simply outgunned us and outmatched us. And so this gave us a certain gloomy, pervasive attitude of dejection for a while, just for a few weeks. And then we began to assert ourselves and prove that we could, short of equipment as we were, we could still match the German soldiers. And despite the many things that have been written pro and con about Patton, General Patton, he took hold, and this injected a new spirit into the 1st Infantry Division and the rest of the 2nd Corps, which was the Army group fighting in North Africa.
You were in the 1st Infantry, and you were again a 2nd lieutenant.
Right.
You have a wonderful story about a meeting with General Patton.
Oh.
Why don't you share that with our viewers?
Well, one of the best movies that I've seen, along with Saving Private Ryan, the other one was Patton, and George C. Scott. And there's one scene there down at a place called El Gatar, way down in southern Tunisia, in which he is standing on a hilltop, and a bunch of German tanks are coming up the valley. Well, it so happened that I was about 50, 60 feet to the right of him. Now, major generals, he was then a 2-star general, they're not supposed to be up front where lieutenants and captains are, but he was that way, and I was where I should be with my anti-tank guns and so on. And we saw those tanks coming up. Now, I saw the same thing he saw, and it's so duplicated so perfectly in that movie. If one wants to get the feel of Africa and Patton as a personality and so on, I suspect that there were several incidents that you and I talked about off camera involving him, and one that I suspect you're referring to had to do with General Theodore Roosevelt, perhaps, and the helmet business. Patton was an enigmatic character, and General Theodore Roosevelt, the son of the president, who was a brigadier general and assistant commanding general of the 1st Division at that time, it clashed. There was an ego involvement here. But Patton had issued an order that all of us strictly adhered to, that you must wear a helmet out in certainly where you're in operations. Well, this was a hilltop near Nicosia in the northern, just as the campaign ended, in the northern end of Sicily. And I was up there looking for, with my binoculars and a couple of the men, looking for tanks down in the valley. And Theodore Roosevelt was over 50, 60 feet away, sort of doing the same thing. And all of a sudden, this command car roars up with Patton in it. The flags are flying and the pistols at his hips and the whole business that we see in the movies. And he spotted General Roosevelt without a helmet on. And right in front of me, a 2nd lieutenant, and 2 or 3 of the enlisted men, he cussed him out and fined him $40 and said, "General, after this you wear a helmet or else." I mean, he was that kind of personality. He was charismatic and a very interesting man, but and he had a few shortcomings, as we know from the slapping of the soldier incident, which occurred at the end of the campaign.
And he caught you lying in the grass, which once wasn't the...
well, yeah. He seemed to expect soldiers that were spit and polish, parade ground types, and so on. Well, the 1st Division in combat in the 18th Infantry, which I was a part of, were not that at all. And so we were taking a little, this was a place just outside of Oran, I think at Medjez el Bab, possibly. Anyway, we were in bivouac. We were relaxed and so on, and the men were lying around. I was lying around. And he came along and said, "Who's in charge here?" in a gruff way. And I jumped up, and "I am, sir." He cussed me out. He said, "These men should be out practicing parade ground tactics and so on." Well, that was the last thing we were thinking about, is parade ground, you know.
One of the things, Frank, that really, again, in the contrast between how we're in doing warfare today and what was going on then, was you, particularly in North Africa, alluded to the fact that there were many times that you felt that the Germans actually could have run you over, and for some reason they would retreat because there was one penetration of a particular area, and it was, you know, it was sort of surprising to you that those things did take place. You know, when you sit there and watch the news and see all these unmanned planes and GPS systems and smart bombs and everything, I mean, in reflection, it must be as if you were in an era that is so completely different from today.
I'm envious as hell of these fellas. I'll tell you that they've got this equipment to work with compared to what we had. And on the other hand, let's look ahead 30 or 40 years, and if there's another war, then, you know, we'll look as archaic to them as you and I look back at what I was doing and what we had to work with. But
was there in reflection, I mean, am I correct in reading into the North African campaign that in a sense many times that was just sort of dumb luck and bad decisions on the part of the Germans, that they as you said, they had better equipment, they had more men, didn't they, I think, than you did?
Yes, at the start. Certainly.
Yeah.
Well, this is all true what you said. However, one ingredient that finally got them, as well as the ability of our people, was the supply line. They were not getting, according to all the reports I can have been able to pick up, the logistical situation for them was very difficult. And part of it was we were sinking their ships, and part of it was the sheer distance and certain inefficiency that took place. But we were building up, you see, and they were worried about the Fortress Europa. They were concerned eventually about retreating.
Right.
And for example, the Meerut Line, that was the famous line that supposedly was going to be held where Tunisia and, I don't remember the exact geography, but anyway, the British had been pushed back from the Cairo and from the Egyptian area, and then then they began to reassert themselves, and they came back in a big way. But we were building up much more than the British, and so on, and we finally just had more men, and even with the equipment differences, better supplies, our supply lines were working. We could use the land mass of North Africa coming in from the Atlantic, you see, and the Germans had to ship across the Mediterranean to get to their supplies across. So that it was a very, as with all of Europe, the whole thing was a growing disparity once we began to build. You remember we did 50,000 planes. They were built in the first year. Mm-hmm. Nobody thought this could be done. Right. So there was a great alteration of the balance of power here, which, of course, finally, with the landings in Normandy, and going through the Hurtgen Forest and across the Remagen and other bridges, finally did the job.
Okay. We're going to take a break, and when we get back, let's talk a little bit about D-Day in Omaha Beach, because certainly, as you said, through the movie Private Ryan, it was really centered around that invasion.
Terrific. Terrific.
Okay. Again, we're talking with Frank Johnson, who is author of One More Hill, one of the 50 best books ever written as a personal account of the Second World War. And we'll be right back after this message.
Let's talk about common sense telecom. We're talking phone, data, and internet services that meet real business needs, your business needs. It's a local call, 308 KMC1. KMC Telecom, it's common sense for business.
Why buy at Matthews Curry Ford Car and Truck Outlet? Because they have over 200 pre-owned vehicles to choose from. Trucks, cars, vans, and the largest selection of sport utility vehicles in the area. Want another reason to buy at Matthews Curry Ford Car and Truck Outlet? Introducing Matthews Curry Certified Used Vehicles. The Matthews Curry Certified Program offers 70-point quality and safety inspection, limited certified warranty program, roadside assistance plan, special service contract eligibility, customer satisfaction package, and more. Matthews Curry Ford, where nobody takes care of you better. Nobody.
I have a very stylish girl. A very stylish girl. A very stylish girl. A very stylish girl.
Willow 506, 506 South Pineapple Avenue, 955-5506.
Wouldn't it be great if you could find all your telecommunication needs in one shop, one stop, all here in town?
Imagine going to just one place for business phone service, comprehensive data reports and records, and fast, reliable internet service.
Well, there is such a place, KMC Telecom. We can meet and exceed all of your telecommunication needs, and we're local. So give us a call, 308-5600. It's common sense for business.
Welcome back. We're with Frank Johnson, who's the author of One More Hill, one of the 50 best books ever written about the Second World War. And Frank obviously was a participant in the war. Frank, I think, again, probably the one thing that most Americans will never forget, because it's been shown to us in so many ways in news clips and in movies, was D-Day, and it was probably the single largest invasion ever done in the history of warfare at any time in one logistic move. Tell us about that time. You come back, you had left North Africa, gone to Italy, come back to England. When you got to England, you sort of talked about, you really didn't know what was going on. Everybody was sort of, it was all rumor about what are we going to do here. And, in fact, by this time you'd been really overseas for what, about a year and a half?
Yes, about a year and a half.
Yeah. There was some thought maybe that you go back to the United States when you left Sicily, or no?
No, we knew we were being shipped back to England for the invasion of the continent. Nobody knew where or when.
Right.
But we went through the usual training and all that kind of thing, and until, let's say, into May of 1944. And one of the questions that still is discussed is why the invasion took place on June 6th. Why did Eisenhower choose that time to invade? Well, there were a number of reasons. The wind, the prediction of winds, and the moon, and various things, tides particularly entered into it. But there's another factor that hasn't been discussed very much, and that is the fact that you had to go behind, as we say, behind the barbed wire for training purposes because of leaks. You couldn't have people making phone calls and so on because the word would get out where they were and how many there were, and the Germans would pick this up. So, and you had also a morale problem. You keep these fellas for weeks behind the barbed wire, as we said, in cantonments and so on, and you got to keep them busy. They've got to be charged up and keep them charged up, but you can't do that indefinitely. So there was a problem. He had the difficulty of not waiting too long, despite the bad tides and the bad predictions, which, as you know, on June 6th and 7th proved out, washed away the mulberries, as we call them, those docks that were for landing purposes and a lot of other things that went wrong. We also had another problem of not only men getting agitated and having to be charged up, but we had been promised two things. The Navy promised us that the landing craft would go all the way in onto the sand, even if they were grounded and eventually lost. Well, what happened was my men and I were dropped in anywhere between 5 and 7 feet of water. So we were trying to hold rifles and things up to keep them from getting wet, but we did not, the naval vessels did not go in far enough for us to drop the fronts down in shallow water. The next thing that went wrong, it sounded like blaming the other services for what went wrong. We made plenty of mistakes of our own. But the Air Force, or then the Army Air Corps it was called, was supposed to have dropped bombs and left a lot of craters all over the beach so that our men would have some protection. Yeah, foxholes before they began to climb the cliff to get up to the German emplacements. Well, the problem was that so much of the fire on us was what we call enfilade fire. It wasn't coming down directly from the top of the cliff where the German machine guns and things were. It was over to the right, a thing called the Point de Hoc. It was a rocky precipice that was just full of big guns, everything up to 105 millimeter howitzers up there. And the Rangers finally scaled the thing, really after dark, on the 6th of June. But that fire kept coming down the beach, you see, and we had no protection. So Theodore Roosevelt and a colonel, Norman D. Cota by name, finally began to exhort the men that you've got to get up this cliff, because there was a low space. The beach was not sandy, it was shale, it was rocky. And there were a couple of low spaces where the tide would come in. And the tide did begin to come in. By this time, the beach was littered with corpses and even the wounded. We couldn't pull the wounded in, but there was no shelter to start with, but we had to get up that cliff. That was the thing, and it was just heartbreaking to leave these guys, some who were screaming and calling for help and so on, but we had to go on. But General Roosevelt and Colonel Cota realized that we were just bogged down, and we didn't have what we had expected in the way of these craters. And General Roosevelt used a cane, and he was then, I suppose he was in his 60s perhaps, and he died 3 or 4 days later of a heart attack due to the exertions on the beach. But he banged the cane down in the sand, and Colonel Cota, and said, "Men, he used a few choice words, which I won't use here, but he said, get up that damn slope, or you're all going to be dead." And this was what finally, I think, turned the tide of moving us up, even though the casualties are great. There were mines all over the place. You never knew, of course, when you'd hit a mine, as in Afghanistan today. We know all about that.
Right.
And so by nightfall, we had gotten to the top, just barely in. I would say we were possibly 500 to 1,000 feet in. It happens that it was the E1 draw that we went up on the Red Beach, part of Omaha Beach, and that's right where the big American cemetery is today, overlooking the beach, which is basically the same. The emplacements have been largely taken down. There were houses that had been people's beach houses that had been turned into fortified machine gun nests by the Germans. They're all gone now. But it's a thing that is, we went back, my wife and I, in 1993 to visit it, and I found exactly where we went up. The thing, although there's obviously a new growth of trees and everything else, after 50 years, it was easy to spot it. I guess those things become indelible in your mind.
Yeah. Can you vividly remember, Frank, what was going through your mind? You landed on a sandbar, if I remember correctly, in your book, in this 5 to 7 feet of water,
yes.
and literally sort of jumped a ride on another that was going to the beach. How many waves of people had landed before you had gotten there? I mean, you were obviously not the first one on the beach, else you probably wouldn't be here with us.
No. Well, it was, I would have to reconstruct this. It was about H-hour plus 1, I would say, about an hour after the first wave went in. And to tell you the truth, Carrie, you don't think about anything except getting the men ashore and trying to save their and your bacon.
Is it a blur of just innate idea of just, am I going to survive this? I mean, is that the recollection that you have?
Yes, that's it. Plus this objective. I mean, the immediate objective, not the long range, not the thing the generals and colonels think about, just to get to the top of that damn cliff.
Yeah.
And try to knock out.
And how long did it take you to get up there?
It took that morning, the rest of the morning and that afternoon, and we got there. I would have to speculate about 4 or 5 p.m. It wasn't dark yet, but we were a couple hours before we got into what they call the bocage country, where all the trees were, and there were still cows around and things. The Germans had were either taken prisoner or killed, or some of them had retreated. But there were a lot of bodies left around to show that despite our problems, you see the big guns, the Texas and other ships, were offshore and kept pummeling the German entrenchments. Mm-hmm. And we've had this friendly fire problem recently. Well, we had some of that too, because the highest ranking officer, I believe, on the European theater, who was killed by friendly fire on our side, was a lieutenant general. So those mistakes of calibrating your guns and trying to locate exactly the target that's not a new problem by any means.
Yeah. While you're on that subject, that was one of the things that I wanted to read, and just very quickly was Monday, July 12th, 1943. Night very cold. Found out this AM that parachutes last night were our own 82nd Airborne. Something all screwed up. Army and Navy shore outfits not informed of paratroop drop. Fired on chutes. A terrible mess. Understand about 400 paratroopers killed. I mean, we talk about 1 or 2 people getting killed in Afghanistan. 400 paratroopers killed by our own fire.
Our own. That was off Gila, Sicily. That was on D-Day, the night of D-Day, which would be July 10th, 11th, 1943, in Sicily. And this was heartrending. It makes you want to cry. Even today, 55 or 60 years later, we came across the bodies of these troopers. The 82nd Airborne, which of course is already in action over there, I understand. And we had a miscommunication problem. There was a communication ship called the Ancon, which stood off in Gila Harbor. And our troops, our paratroopers, flew over and were dropped appropriately, but somewhere along the line, the signals from the Ancon to get into us on the ground didn't get through, and so we shot our own men down, because the Germans had led the world in parachute troops and so on. We'd known that for years, and so the assumption was, in the lack of other information, that these were Germans. They were trying to push us back into the water. And now the 400 was a figure that was reported to me and to us from other headquarters. We probably, in my own unit, we probably found, I'd say 12 or 15 of these men had been shot down, and they weren't wounded. I mean, the Nazis were very careful to kill them. You remember the story of the parachute, this was in France, the parachute American who got caught on a steeple of a church, and nobody cut him down and let him escape. The Nazis killed him as he hung there on the side of the church, and it was just terribly sad.
Now, at the time, was this well publicized to the American people?
I can't tell you. I wasn't here.
Yeah, obviously,
and
yeah.
Stars and Stripes was, of course, the Army newspaper, but it was a vehicle of the government, and was, I think, things like that were pretty well censored. I know when Patton slapped the soldier in Nicosia in Sicily, we didn't learn about that until weeks later, and it was from American newspapers that had the freedom of the press that told us about that.
Yeah.
So I imagine they did not inform people, at least right away.
Okay. We're going to give you a chance to have a glass of water, and we're going to be right back again with Frank Johnson, author of One More Hill.
Let's talk about common sense telecom. We're talking phone, data, and internet services that meet real business needs, your business needs. It's a local call. 308 KMC1. KMC Telecom. It's common sense for business.
Call the team at Spotlight Graphics for all your printing needs. Call the team at Spotlight Graphics for all your printing needs. They're on time.
For termite and pest control, call the professionals. Call Macy's. We're safe on the environment, but tough on bugs. Our all-dry products are stainless, odorless, and allergy-free for your peace of mind. Get free estimates on all of our services: termite protection, tent fumigation, lawn fertilization, and insect control. Macy's Termite and Pest Control, serving Sarasota, Venice, Englewood, and Northport. Mention you saw this ad on Blab TV and save 15% on initial service for lawn and pest control.
Wouldn't it be great if you could find all your telecommunication needs in one shop, one stop, all here in town?
Imagine going to just one place for business phone service, comprehensive data reports and records, and fast, reliable internet service.
Well, there is such a place, KMC Telecom. We can meet and exceed all of your telecommunication needs. And we're local. So give us a call, 308-5600. It's common sense for business.
Welcome back. We're with Frank Johnson, author of One More Hill. Frank, we were talking about D-Day and Omaha Beach. You by this time now have fought in terrains of desert, mountainous situation through Sicily, talking about Mount Etna and seeing that, and now you're in the hedgerows. What was it like in that situation? Because on the one hand you had the cover, of the hedgerows, and then you had all these open fields to get through. That must have been a scary situation.
Well, it was scary because we had the problem of being almost in a tunnel. I mean, these hedgerows, they were country lanes originally, and the trees were across and made it very dark to see what's ahead of you. The bushes along the sides could be anywhere around 6, 8, 10 feet high, and there were then the open fields. These hedgerows would open out into a field, and well, what's out there? Well, there may be a herd of cows there, but there also can be a lot of Germans in the high grass waiting to ambush you. And this was what got me. I hate to admit that I was shot in the back, but that's exactly what happened, because we went through a hedgerow, the 12 men that I had with me, and Lieutenant Gardner, the other officer, and there apparently was a German sniper in a tree, and he got me in the back and the left lung. And so then the men, I told Lieutenant Gardner to take the men back, and he did, but
why did they leave you there? Now I remember the report, did they assume that you were dead?
Well, it was my fault in a way, because I said to Gardner, take the men back, I'm dying. I was lying there on the ground, and I didn't think I was going to make it, and I knew we were in an ambush, and so that was why the missing in action and then later the killed in action report reached my parents, because the Army had informally, I think, a 30-day rule. If you were MIA for 30 days and there was no report one way or the other, they were very likely to call you KIA. The Red Cross and other people were supposed to try to pass information back and forth to some. That broke down all the time. So the fact of the 30 days plus what I had said to Gardner made it pretty clear that I was a goner instead of being a prisoner of war, as it turned out.
Okay, you were on a reconnaissance mission with these people.
Yes.
That were out there. You sent them back. You're left out there. What happens then? I mean,
well, the Germans picked me up and carried me. Nobody was tortured. I was slapped in the face a few times for information, but I was just a lieutenant, and they probably knew I didn't have any information of value, but you give your name, rank, and serial number, period. Mm-hmm. And there were some questions about the division and how many more were coming and so on, but which I didn't know, but I was losing blood pretty fast and in and out of shock, so they couldn't get much out of me anyway. So they put me into a truck, I think it was, rather bumpy, I remember that, down to a place called Wren. And there we were put into what was then a prisoner, Stalag 221, which had been a girls' school. This had about 600 Canadians, British, and Americans in it, with virtually a self-governing thing. We had some German guards, of course, and all these people, virtually all of them, were injured one way or the other. And there was not much chance of escape for most of us. We just weren't able to. And then way back...
Medical treatment, I mean...
perfunctory.
Uh-huh. Was it German or was it the prisoners?
The prisoners, there were 2 or 3 doctors among the Allies there. there was some one or two German doctors or corpsmen or whatever. I still have in German the report on myself and my lung condition. I'm not able to read German. I need someone like you who knows so many languages. But no, the treatment was fairly good as far as supplies were available, and black bread and brown soup and so on, and occasionally some buddy would sell or trade a gold watch for 3-4 eggs or something like that. You
even had a beer.
Yes. But it was nothing like what the Japanese inflicted on our guys in the Pacific. I think we were well treated compared to those Bataan and the fellows over there.
Right. When you're finally rescued, though, in fact, you were really on the verge of death because your lungs were filling up.
An empyema, it's called. I'm not a medical man, of course, but most of the left chest was full of pus and things like that. They call empyema, and the organs were moved over toward the right. And but they got the patent of the rescue again, came through and relieved us. We were flown back to England and operated on, and then we were what's called ZI'd, sent to the zone of the interior, which meant the United States, in a hospital plane. I had my one good look at Iceland, at Reykjavik, and it was August or early September, and it was so damn cold. I opened the door and looked out the plane, and even in that time of year, said, I just had a bathrobe on, of course, and that was then into Mitchell Field, which doesn't exist anymore up in New York.
When your parents had presumed that you were dead, when were they told that you were alive? Obviously, when you had returned to England after Stalag 221 had been liberated?
Yes, that would be, I still have the telegram. I think it was about August 22nd, and it retracted the previous MIA and KIA.
When were they informed that you were killed in action?
Well, that would have been about 45 days before the final affirmative telegram.
Right.
And then, of course, before that even was the missing in action, the 30-day business. And so they had finally got word of J.A. Ulio, U-L-I-O. He was the adjutant of the Army, and all these telegrams were sent out with his name on them. And we still have those in the family archives.
So you come back to the United States, Frank, and of all things, obviously there was some other activities in between, but you go to work for the CIA.
Yes.
What'd you do at the CIA?
Well, I was kind of a liaison man. I was middle management with certain officers in the Pentagon. And this was the dirty tricks department. I won't say that I was involved in any of these assassinations or any things that the novelists all write about. But most of it was just boring, reading cables and sending out instructions and so on. This was the British Commonwealth branch of the dirty tricks department, and that was kind of quiet compared to the Russian and other areas. One of the funny episodes that took place was running into, and I mean literally running into General Bradley, who was Chief of Staff of the Army. I came around one of those corners in the Pentagon with a whole armload of documents and things, some of which were marked top secret, and literally ran into the general, and the papers flew all over the place. And he helped me pull them together, and of course I apologized and so on. And he said, young man, I've seen you somewhere before. And I said, well, I served under you along with about 3 million others. And he said, were you down at Brackworth Barracks just before D-Day? I said, well, yes, sir. And you talked to us, and with a map, the rubber model in front of us and so on. And the amazing thing was didn't raise a question. They were all just lieutenants and captains, all junior guys. But he was trying to show us on this rubber model where the E1 draw was and where they thought the enemy emplacements were, at the best of their knowledge. And damned if he didn't remember that. He thought a minute and so on. Yes, I was talking to you young officers and so on, and he put it down to the place, the time, and so on. Naturally, didn't know my name, but it was amazing. And of course, he was beloved and respected by all of us as a great general.
It's a small world department.
Yeah.
We're going to go to another break, and when we get back, let's talk about the transition. You know, we probably could do this for another couple of hours with your life's career and stories, but let's talk, because we're really talking about, you know, Frank Johnson, the writer tonight, about that transition from writing, you know, really your life's account during the Second World War into novels, because you have made that transition.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay. We're talking with Frank Johnson, again, author of One More Hill, and we're going to be right back after this message.
Let's talk about common sense telecom. We're talking phone, data, and internet services that meet real business needs, your business needs. It's a local call. 308 KMC1. KMC Telecom. It's common sense for business.
Most of us go to the dentist to maintain the health of our teeth, but don't maintain the health of our spine. The spine houses the link between the brain and virtually every cell in our body, controlling every major bodily function. Dr. DeCubulis offers excellent chiropractic care for family wellness. He takes evening appointments, has a no-waiting policy, and treats each and every patient as if they were his only. Call Sunrise Health Center at 925-2889.
Riding down the road on a Harley-Davidson is pure enjoyment, and Rossiter's Harley-Davidson can make that happen with one of their new or used Harleys from their new 22,000 square foot facility at 330 Cattleman Road. Already have a bike? Well, come to Rossiter's for genuine Harley-Davidson motor clothes and accessories. Their knowledgeable staff at the parts counter has the information and the original parts you need. Their expanded service department can repair, maintain, or customize your Harley any way you want. Rossiter's Harley-Davidson is the leader of the pack with 2 locations to serve you better.
Wouldn't it be great if you could find all your telecommunication needs in one shop, one stop, all here in town?
Imagine going to just one place for business phone service, comprehensive data reports and records, and fast, reliable internet service.
Well, there is such a place, KMC Telecom. We can meet and exceed all of your telecommunication needs, and we're local. So give us a call, 308-5600. It's common sense for business.
Welcome back to Dateline Sarasota. Frank, you have written how many books now? This was your first book?
Yes, that was the first one.
Yeah. How many books have you written?
I think there's 11 altogether.
11 books. And every one other than this is fiction?
Well, no, there was A Life of Lord Mountbatten, and there was one called Defense by Committee and Defense by Ministry. They were on the British Defense Organization, and one on U.S. foreign policy. But this was when I was a professor and an academician, and you know that old phrase, publisher perish. You had to grind out a book every now and then. But when I retired, well, this was in my field, and I was interested in it and enjoyed it. But when I retired in 1987, I said, look, this serious stuff, I've had enough of this. I want to see what I can do in the fantasy world, just the imaginative kinds of stuff, and that's what I've been doing since.
Tell us about some of your books. Your latest book is The Mismated.
Well, yeah, this Mismated, that's this book here, which has the story is about a countess in North Italy and the many problems she has, including crime and incest in her own family and so on and so on. It's kind of a bizarre thing, but it takes place in an area that my wife Ellen and I know very well, Fiesole and Lucca and Palermo and places like that. It's just a woman trying to survive who finally, to give it all away, finally ends up as a suicide. But so it isn't a happy ending, really. But this is you're a free agent. I mean, you don't have to be locked into the library and objectivity and so on and so on. You just are a free agent, and I'm enjoying it.
Now, are these creative juices based upon your feelings of intrigue from your experiences in the CIA, or are they more location based? I mean, you've got Key West to Cuba is another book, for instance.
Yes.
I mean, are they geographically inspired as well as imagination inspired?
Well, I think most novelists and writers of short stories will tell you that they're either outright autobiographical, or they take an incident that has a nucleus of fact in it, and they weave all kinds of changes and so on around it. And in mine, in most cases, you mentioned Key West to Cuba, and there was another one called Santori, which had to do with CIA people and FBI people and intrigue in Washington. The one involved the first woman president of the United States who climbs and in some sense sleeps her way to the top. And another one, which somebody said was quite predictive, had the first Jewish vice president of the United States. So later, 2 years later or so, along comes a candidate for that position, the first Jew in our history. So these have to do with, in almost all cases, some relation to an incident that I was involved in, or I heard about, or knew about that was factual. But then you make it bizarre and eccentric to interest people. The trick here is, if you're not in horror stories or science fiction, how do you make it seem realistic and yet bizarre? Most of us live rather mundane lives and without too much excitement in them. Well, how do you build in excitement, or almost always it's conflict between two people or more than two people? You've got to have friction, you've got to have conflict. Well, how do you do all this and still be on the side of reality? And this is the trick. I constantly fight it, and I guess other writers do too.
Mm-hmm. But this really has become a passion, an avocation as opposed to a vocation for you. Is that fair or not?
Oh, absolutely. You want, physically there's a lot of things I can't do, but, and I don't want to do certain things like being a consultant back in academic life or whatever.
Right.
And so this is, I call it productive now. I don't know whether it's productive or not. We sell a few hundred of these and so on. We never break even on them. And, but it's self-publication. But I enjoy it, and I think I'm doing something productive, but that's for others to make a judgment of that kind.
Uh-huh. But certainly you're enjoying yourself.
Enjoying myself, and my wife says it keeps me out of trouble anyway. I'm not badgering her too much, and not trying to do physically things I can't do, thanks to 55 years ago.
Right. You did mention that novelists, in some sense, have a bit of self-biography. Do you have any desire to do, if you will, an extension of One More Hill and do a biographical account of your life? Because certainly you've lived a fascinating life, and that you've not only had the war experience, but you've been around obviously in the academic world, in the foundation world, and in so many fields of life. You have lived quite a full life.
Well, yes, and well, I'm a survivor. As I mentioned to you before, I live down in Naples, where the average age is deceased, and but and no, actually, I feel quite satisfied with trying at least to be productive in a sense, and as I say, keep out of trouble. There's an awful lot of people that I think, older people, that just don't do anything. They sit by the pool and drink beer and so on. I guess if you love golf, that's good that's good physical action. We have more golf courses, I think, per capita in the Naples area than anywhere in the world.
Well, certainly, Frank. You know, this has been an unbelievable pleasure for me, and I've got to tell you, I hope that that I am as lucid and as fascinating as you are at 80 years old, as I certainly have found you to be, and I'm sure our viewers have. And I certainly, welcome you back anytime that you've got the opportunity to come up and do this again with us.
Well, it's a real honor to me to be here. We love this city, and the fact that you were mayor of #1 here in the city and so on, it's really very flattering, and I have enjoyed it thoroughly.
Well, thank you so much, Frank, for taking time out of your life to do this with us.
My pleasure.
Okay. Next week, folks, you got to tune in. We're going to have chapter number 2. If you remember Max Robinson, who left his life in New York City selling advertising for the Today and the Tonight Show for NBC, went to the islands, built up a large business, and was literally thrown out and became broke. We're going to have part 2 of Max's story on how he became a multimillionaire at the age most people retire. Next week with Max Robinson. So until then, have a good week, and we'll see you right back here on Dateline Sarasota. Good night.
Across the front of the band, open back prong, open bridge work, a scroll cutout design on the side, as you can see right there. It is absolutely exceptional. Now it's 491.